I think a lot of people make assumptions around who their most valuable customers are and go, oh, well, we target people like this, or these are our customers, and they don't actually look in the data. And actually, the good thing about a lot of the data you've got, you're sat on a gold mine of information to help you build your future targeting. So you might think it's like everybody's got this assumption that it's only 15-year-old girls on TikTok. But actually, when you analyze the data, it's not. It's a completely broad spectrum of demographic and ages, and it's increasing more in the 30s to 40s to 50s. That's the fastest growing section. And then what will happen is the young kids will go find something else because TikTok won't be cool anymore. All right, that's what's going to happen. It's like all the young people left Facebook because Facebook was for old people, which isn't the case still. Everybody's on Facebook, but I think it's understanding your data, analyzing your data, and to get the target audience of then where do you then go find that, put your creative message to attract new customers. And I think people don't do it because it's hard.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I am Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I also run Did It, a mid-sized digital marketing agency that has traditional as well. We got our start in SEO, and paid search was the second foray right around the time that GoTo.com was founded, and that was pre-Google on the paid search side, but Google was shortly thereafter following with paid search. Also run a brand, Truth Nutrition, and a nonprofit, Giving Forward. Super excited to have John Readman on with me. He's also been involved in the search marketing industry for quite some time and runs Ask Bosco at the moment, sort of as a founder and leading product. So always like to chat with folks who are in the weeds. But in order to frame the conversation, what you can do, John, is just give the elevator pitch of what Ask Bosco does.
Yeah, so Ask Bosco. So I set this business up about 4 years ago, and I think I often used to find running agencies in the past, you had this sort of what I often describe as a triangle of mistrust, or a love triangle of distrust between brands, agencies, and then the ad platforms. And ad platforms now are increasingly talking directly to the brand, saying, spend more money on my platform. And then you've got the agencies trying to give the best advice to the client, and everybody's just confused. And there's this sort of, and to layer on top of that, we've got an increase in black boxes within the ad platforms and too much data. So what we've built at Ask Bosco is an AI marketing analytics and reporting platform. And what it does, it enables brands and agencies to connect all their data into one place. So a bit like an easier to use and more cost effective version of Supermetrics or Funnel. And then we've got a beautiful AI dashboard layer that lets any business user interrogate their data and get the answers they really want. Or if you're an agency, be able to use it to find the answer your clients are asking. And then I suppose the two clever bits, Kevin, are it enables you to benchmark yourself against your competitors. So how are you doing versus your peer set? But then also the hard question we're trying to answer, which I think is becoming increasingly hard, is where should I spend my next dollar? So if you have a meeting with Google, which I'm sure you and your clients have many, they'll say spend it with Google. If you have a meeting with Facebook or Meta, they'll say spend it with Facebook, and now increasingly TikTok. But if you're a brand or an agency, you just want to try and place your bets in the right place. So that's what we've built. We've got about 450 brands using it globally. Many sort of independent agencies are using it really to save them time, but also help allocate their budgets in the right place.
Great, thanks so much. One thing that I've found sort of fascinating, having been an economics major as an undergraduate and having gotten my MBA from Yale, and economics sort of being the underpinning of my traditional education, was when I started in advertising at McCann Erickson in 1992. The media buying teams would buy all the traditional media because digital really didn't even exist yet. And when you bought traditional media, you got a discount for buying more. And as more and more media types have gone into the auction environment, sort of the first auctioned high quality media, really, certainly on the digital side, but was search. Before there was the hybrid auction that Google runs, there was sort of a more traditional semi-transparent auction that GoTo.com ran. But the one common thread once things started getting auctioned off that were valuable media assets was if you wanted more of it, you had to pay more. And so the more you bought, the more expensive it got. So the concept of market elasticity came into place, which really never was anything that folks needed to think about in traditional media buying. They never had to say, well, what are the relative elasticities of the platforms that I'm buying on? And now obviously the way one buys media across search and social and programmatic, the ability to buy more media at approximately the same price is very different within those. And I think that's where forecasting becomes particularly difficult. And it's also where it's more difficult to answer that question about where do I spend my next dollar, right? Because the next dollar that you spend will actually often yield you less than the previous dollar that you spent within the same platform. Because of course, above and beyond just regular media elasticities or market elasticities, you're going to have a competitor who reacts to the changes that you make, right? And if they're used to getting a certain amount of traffic and your keyword sets are fairly similar, and all of a sudden they notice they're not getting the same traffic, there's a possibility they'll go ahead and jump up their budget, which of course Google and Bing are ecstatic about. So
Yeah.
I'd love to have you sort of work us through sort of the math, right, of how you guys thought through this idea. Like, okay, we can't be perfect in predicting what will happen when we choose to spend more in a particular channel or within a set of keywords or within a campaign of a particular channel because we don't know what the competitors are going to do, but we still at least need to approximate what the relative benefits will be of deploying that extra $1,000 or £1,000 if we're in the UK in a particular area or a particular channel versus a different channel.
Yeah, so this is hard, and I think most of the listeners here will have probably had a stab at this with a big spreadsheet and extracting some data, and I suppose the challenge is with a lot of this, it's only as good as the data you've got. So I think the first place is you need to make sure that all your tracking and everything is as good as it can be. We could have a whole separate conversation later, Kevin, about how everybody's making that harder and making that more of a black box. So it actually, if anything, increases you to spend, it encourages you to spend more, which is a completely separate discussion. But if you go back to where we started in sort of first principles, what we wanted to do was take in 2 years of historic marketing behavior and spend. So at the sort of high level, it's a cost versus revenue sort of model. So what we're trying to do is enable people to understand, well, where's that? So there's a sort of normal distribution curve. Where are you willing? Where's the optimal point for you to invest your money? Because exactly what you said, you could start spending more, but you get less return. And that may or may not be acceptable to the brand. And I think people need to also understand what is their acceptable cost per acquisition or acceptable cost of sale that they're willing to work within. And it's amazing still how many customers we speak to, and they haven't really gone through the maths across the whole funnel. And maybe they're just looking at last click wins. And in that scenario, it's often Google paid search or Google shopping. But fundamentally, what we're doing is we take 2 years of historical data in, and then we look at all that data, and we're then trying to work out, right, okay, versus demand, versus how much did you spend, versus what you're willing to spend, where is the optimal point? And we start off at a channel level, and then with each channel, we then go down to an individual campaign level. And then we start modeling that out. So it may just be we recommend moving budgets between campaigns because you're going to get a better bang for your buck, or it may be we actually recommend moving budgets between channels and then campaigns within those channels. So, and then we're also taking into account seasonality. So obviously the last few weeks has been very different to maybe the previous 3 weeks in October. So if you looked at October's demand versus November, and some of that seasonality you can pick up from historical trading data, but if they weren't particularly good at their campaigns in the past, you're not going to necessarily encourage them to spend more because they were poor before. So we pull in a lot of third party data around seasonality and around demand so that we can work out, right, what's the potential headroom. So I suppose the other hard question to answer is, what should I be spending? How much could I spend? Because that's often the question that everybody wants to know, is like, what's the optimal point before I start? Every pound doesn't get me as many pounds or dollars back. So, and I suppose the interesting thing about what we built is it enables people to run the model multiple times a day or a week. So you could almost go on a Monday, right, what's the optimal amount based on what we sold on Saturday and Sunday now for the rest of the week? Whereas historically, you might run an MMM model that looks back over the last year and gives you some indication of what worked and what didn't work, but then that becomes quite static. Whereas what this enables people to do is react to what trading happened yesterday to change what the budgets are going to be today. So you can be very reactive and apply based on what is and isn't going on. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The way the auctions are built is, and in that recent legal case with Google, is when they had to release everything, is it's designed ultimately to make Google more money, right? And it's an unfortunate, and I think digital marketing's almost become a victim of its own success because it has been so successful over the last 15 years, 20 years, that we've all got a little bit addicted to just paying $1 and getting $10 back. And I think there's a less of a focus on actually building a proper brand now, whereas everybody's fighting over the bottom of the funnel. And it's almost become an acceptable cost. Well, that's just how much we spend on Google. And I think in the boardroom, nobody's really got the confidence to ask, well, is that the right amount of money we should be spending with Google? Just because everybody else is spending lots of money with Google or Facebook, how much should we be spending? And I don't think people have got the confidence to ask that question. Certainly in the brands, I think it's sort of just become an acceptable cost. And in some situations now, if you think about new entrants to a market, they actually can't afford to compete with some of the big brands. Whereas if you think about startups that came along 10, 15 years ago, they could compete because they were new in and it was exciting and they could bid on keywords and get into the market. Whereas now you've got the big guys, and it's very difficult unless you're super niche. So, or you have to do something completely different, maybe go down influencer marketing or focus on newer channels like TikTok, for instance. But that's fundamentally how the model works. And then it constantly then learns. So there's an element of machine learning in there to see, right, what happened, what worked, where was the headroom. So it should get better and better. And it's also learning at a category level across other campaigns. So yeah, so the more data that's in there, the better it will just get.
Yeah, one of the, pet peeves that many of us in the industry have with regards to data is the increased black boxing of platforms. I think Google in particular with PMax has sort of simultaneously giveth and taketh away, right? In that they've, even within the sort of manual platforms, there are several targeting levers that some of the more sophisticated marketers like to have in order to sort of cherry pick out the clicks they really wanted, the clicks that had the profiles that had the highest LTV or the highest profit margin, which wasn't just conversion rate, but was AOV and was the LTV and all the things that predicted a particularly good customer. We had baked into our models, right? But because Google knows more about an impression than they necessarily transmit in the targeting levers, right? You need to simultaneously often be running a manual campaign and a PMax campaign that allows you to sort of grab inventory that Google's ML or AI engine decided was probably good for you to get. And I think that sort of conundrum for those in the industry sort of at the controls of campaigns has been sort of an ongoing challenge because you sort of never know when Google's going to make a fairly dramatic change. to the algorithms. So, for those folks who are at the controls, sort of trying to do the right thing for themselves if they're an in-house marketer or for their client if they're an agency, how do you recommend they deal with that inherent tension of sort of having or wanting the control and running manual campaigns, and then simultaneously dealing with the black boxes of the
I
PMAXs?
think, yeah, it's an ongoing conundrum. And initially, we had clients who were like, "No, we're still going to have everything split out. We're going to try and manually." And actually, helped clients do a lot of testing on this, and PMAX then was winning, right? So it is a very good approach. But I think the traditionalist in me, probably similar to yourself, Kevin, is Google aren't going to build something that's going to make them less money. So it's like you set your targets in a PMAX and it will go and hit those targets, but could it have done better? And I think it's trying to identify. So there's clever scripts and other things that I know agencies and other people are using to try and pick out, right, well, should we split this bit out or should we split that bit out? But I think it's becoming inherently hard. I suppose it'll be interesting to see how over time, with the deprecation of the tracking and cookies and everything else, if that all goes away, how will we be able to get to a point as an agency or as a data company where if we've got first party data. So the other thing we do a lot with clients companies, we actually absorb all their e-commerce data. So we've got all, so let's say if you're on Shopify, we can pull in all your transactions, all your customers, and then we can start looking at, right, what's customer lifetime value? Where did we get that first customer from? And how can we go get more customers like that? And I think we're all going to be forced to have a better first party data model where we can actually look at the data ourselves of our customers rather than necessarily trusting all the third parties. But I think the way we tend to look at it, if it's in an acceptable cost per acquisition or an acceptable cost of sale, we're just going to have to keep going with it because until there's a big, I don't know, court case or leak or something, it is what it is. And I think we've all got used to having control. And I suppose it's like the old, as you were saying back in the days, if you advertised on linear TV, traditional cable TV or terrestrial TV, is you got to a situation where you might pick certain slots, but as and when it went out on air, you never really knew. And maybe somebody turned up to your store, right? But it was not very measurable. It was almost like, and we see a lot of clients just looking at total marketing spend and total revenue, and is that acceptable? Right? Which is very old fashioned and traditional, but as long as that maths works, they'll move bits around in the middle. I personally prefer to optimize very granularly, and that's what our platform and it tries to help people do. But I think I often describe PMAX as a bit like putting the kid in charge of the candy store, right? They're going to keep going until they run out of candy. But I suppose we are where we are, and what we can do is give people visibility on the data so that then they can use the models and the algorithms to try and predict, well, where is the best place to place our bets. And the other thing we see a huge amount of issues around now is untracked revenue or platforms overclaiming or overstating their credit in the journey. So
Sure.
Meta's a big example of this. If you've ever touched anything to do with the Facebook platform and then you convert, they'll take the credit, even though it's like, so I think understanding attribution is going to become a harder science. But I think people need to start having the conversations in the boardroom around, right, actually, we really need to understand the contribution of all our marketing efforts because it's no longer easy enough just to keep dialing up the paid search because you'll get to a point where you can't afford to play. Well, I suppose it depends what you're selling and how big your margins are. But I think it's going to if anything, the question I often challenge clients and agencies with is if we'd have said 5, 6 years ago, oh, there's going to be this new social platform that's coming from China and people are going to be sharing videos on it and it's going to take massive percentages of media spend. Everybody said, no, that's not going to happen. So it's like, well, what's the next TikTok? What's that going to be? And how can you get ready and leverage for taking advantage of the next channel coming along, because I think that's going to be interesting. And we've already seen a share in search now within the AI. So within ChatGPT, are people just going to go and ask the ChatGPTs of the world questions rather than asking Google questions? And then I suppose, how do they then monetize that? So I think as digital marketers, we've got to have one hand in the data and be really granular, but at the same time looking on the horizon, looking for the low hanging fruit of, well, where are the new opportunities, and is our strategy aligned to make sure that our brand is visible, our content's visible, and when there's an opportunity to potentially get hold of ads in those new channels, that we're ready. Because it's only a matter of time before they all either get integrated together, which you're already seeing with like the Google Gemini search. You can see that that's now so, but how quickly soon, because that takes up so much of the top of the search box now. How quickly, when will we be able to bid on keywords in the Gemini results, right? That's got to be coming, right? It's got to be, because at the moment they're pushing all the ads down to prove that they're giving a better answer. But surely we'll be able to sponsor that at some point, or push that, because these are ad platforms at the end of the day. Much as they're wanting to be search engines to give the customer the right result, fundamentally they're also ad platforms. So I don't know if you agree or not, but I think it's about seeing where the opportunities to get in early on some of these, or are you ready to get in early on some of those things, is. And I think you can only do that if you really understand your customer data and where your customers are hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. The finding that tipping point for a channel where the amount of effort you spend experimenting with it is justified by, their future growth versus a shiny object that might, make a big splash and then not end up achieving critical mass. You'll then, of course, have spent both human capital and potentially, the dollar capital against it, or financial capital against it. So finding that perfect sweet spot as you try new platforms is absolutely key. You mentioned something which also has implications on the way a brand should spend if they're a newer brand. You had mentioned that there are categories where it's nearly impossible for that newer player to a category to participate, particularly in a Google search auction, but potentially also even in other auctions. And it's fascinating because all the data that we've seen from our own clients, but as well as data from third parties, seems to indicate that people's brand trust or their willingness to interact with a brand's ad, regardless of whether it's a search ad or a different ad, um, is highly correlated to effective previous ad spending and media overall, which could include earned media as well, right? So that's part of why it's very difficult to break into a search category if search is your only channel, because you haven't built that trust. So even if you manage to elbow your way into a top position, um, that the chances of your ad being interacted with come in comparison to a brand that is already top of mind in that category, it's a dramatic difference. And of course, Google rewards, within its quality score, that one of the biggest factors is the predicted normalized expected click-through rate for that ad, right? So they're obviously going to give a much, much higher quality score for a brand which the consumer or the business to business buyer is more likely to engage with. That requires you go out and do top of funnel marketing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're essentially having to spend at the top of the funnel for awareness and educational purposes, and building the brand so that you can, afford your lower funnel media.
Yeah, and I think that that points absolutely the sort of missing key that's going on in the business plans and in some of the discussions in boardrooms, because the CFO or the CEO is going, well, how many sales did we get from that spend? And it's like, well, no, we need to be allocating a certain amount of budget. And it's difficult for startup brands who've maybe just raised some money or are spending their own money to go, well, we've got to build our own brand. And we've had to do it for Ask Bosco, because nobody knows who we are, nobody trusts us. And it's like, well, why should I even engage? Who are these guys? And very early on, we were like, oh no, we're just going to build this thing. We're going to point some traffic at it and people will buy it. Well, why would they buy it? A lot of it is about trust. And I think a lot of people forget or are misguided because it has been relatively easy in the past. Whereas now I think it's, if often people think digital marketing's easy and e-commerce is easy, I think it's as hard as anything ever. And also the margins are tighter and the advertising costs are getting higher and higher. We did a test recently on a client's brand term. And we looked at the cost for them to bid on their own brand over the last 3 years, and it's gone up by 40%. And there's not even that many competitors bidding on their brand. So it's whether that's inflation or that's just the ad platform setting what they want to set to make more money, or it's the fact that their brand has increased in popularity. So Google think, well, we can charge more money for a click on that brand. But I think you're absolutely right. Understanding and a lot of it just goes down to traditional marketing and human psychology of why people do things. Whereas when 10 years ago, if you had, I don't know, cheap printer cartridges.com and you appeared in a Google shopping, you could quickly grow a brand. But I think now it's about the reviews, it's about your service, it's about your policies, and it's a lot of it's about trust. And and then I suppose you overlay on top of that, which makes it even harder if you're in e-commerce, is people expect it to be as easy and as quick to arrive as Amazon, right? So they've just changed people's expectations of what normal is, right? So it's not okay to wait 2 weeks for a parcel to arrive. I want my parcel tomorrow, or I want my parcel the same day. So but I think your point around branding and upper funnel and trying to think of clever and different ways to do things. And I don't know whether I'm proud about this or still a little bit surprised, but the best performing campaign we've done for our AI marketing analytics platform is actually direct mail. So, right. And I was looking at the cost for us to get our brand in front of people on LinkedIn and in front of people in Google. And it was actually to get some engagement, it was really, really expensive. And then we said, well, we sort of know who we want to send these things to. So, can we get the data and can we actually do that? But I think it's about having a sort of joined up plan. And right, so we send out little yellow postcards to CFOs of brands and say, is how much marketing are spending on Google keeping you awake at night? And then on the back, there's a tea bag, a chamomile tea bag. And it says option A, drink the tea. You might sleep better. Option B, scan the QR code and find out how much you should be spending on Google. And we've had loads of positive feedback. But again, we know who's got that. We know the post has arrived. And then when we follow up, in other channels we can then retarget them and we can add them to social lists. It's hopefully there's some brand recall, but I do think you're absolutely right, Kevin. A lot of people, even if they can afford to, won't get the cut through because they haven't got the brand trust. And it's very difficult to plan for that and budget for that because it's expensive. But I don't think you need big fancy branding agencies. I just think you need to have thought about, right, we need to spend some money building our reputation, our visibility within our niche.
Yeah,
Niche.
so it's fascinating that you mentioned direct mail because it has a direct mail division, and I was trying to find ways to differentiate it, and actually did end up building a platform that put a custom QR code on every piece of mail. And for many of our clients, because of the escalating inflationary costs of digital media, they also found that direct mail was one of the highest performing channels. And there are so many factors that were involved. I mean, part of it was the tactile nature of direct mail and the targetability of direct mail, and the fact that we were creating the Glengarry lead at the instant the QR code was scanned because it was a unique code per mail, right? But part of it was just the costs of direct mail. While paper has gotten more expensive and postage has gotten more expensive, that the benefits of the high targeting and I guess trust is built more quickly for a tactile piece,
Yeah.
right? The fact that a person was willing to spend the money to put something in the mail, um, meant that they cared enough
Yeah,
about
I
you
think
as an
yeah,
individual to target
yeah.
you.
But I also think it's a less noisy environment. It's like, especially if executed well. And I know we're meant to be talking about digital here, but it's like my big thing is I'm a marketeer and I really appreciate good quality marketing, and that I very rarely get a good targeted piece of quality DM. But when you do, you think, and then you stick it on the desk or stick it on your fridge, and you think, right, I'll go back to that. And I think it's good for B2B, it's good for B2C, and it's definitely got a place in your marketing plan. But I think so many people have just thought, right, we're going to just go Google, Facebook, we're going to go some programmatic display, and nobody even has it on the list.
Mhm.
Uh, and I just think it's like you very rarely see in marketing departments now, and I think this is a lost skill, and AI is probably going to kill it even more, is a good quality copywriter who can write headlines for ads, right? Or headlines for emails or headlines for direct mail. That used to be one of the best paid jobs in a marketing team or in a marketing agency. They were like the guys. And now you very rarely see those sort of people who are wordsmiths who can really create the words, and we're all just relying on AI to come up with our next email title or our next ad title. So but as an AI business, I shouldn't be downplaying AI. But I suppose my thing is, I think it's about the use within the team. I still think you need that human capital and human inspiration to get the best out of it all.
Yeah, which leads to an interesting conversation point, which is about creativity, right? Because the ability for any platform to deliver, right, is right person, right message, right time. And so part of that is the creativity of the message, because even if you've got an amazing targeting layer, right, where you've got the right person, you've understood the people, you got to get the message and the timing right. So, a lot of folks, for example, have never properly implemented day parting, right, or
Yeah.
day of week targeting or anything like that. And so, time is, right message, right time, right audience. You need to have all three resonating at the same time. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how sort of data helps you tease that out, right? You,
Well,
you still need your brilliant copywriter and your idea person for the message, but then you need to sort of, layer on the other factors as well.
I think the data can play a huge part in this, and there's a recent example of we did a whole load of, and I sort of alluded to it before, but analyzing existing customers, right, and existing customers both in terms of customer lifetime value, numbers of transactions, did they buy at list price, did they buy in sale, where did we first get them, what's actually their demographic profile, because again you can buy a lot of this data to overlay on top, and then you can get and sort of come up with several clusters of types of customer. And then the good thing about, once you understand your customers, right, they're the customers we want. The beauty of a lot of the programmatic platforms, or even connected TV, because that's the other thing we could talk about, is the cost of doing TV has come down a huge amount now, especially with browser-based connected TV. You can then go to the to the ad platforms or the programmatic desk and say, right, we want to put our brand and our message in front of more customers exactly like this. And then you can do some really good acquisition campaigns where you believe you should put yourself in front of the perfect client in the environment where and then you are relying on the ad platforms and the programmatic platforms, the connected TV platforms executing on their side of the bargain, but they normally do because that's their job and that's how they make their money. But I suppose it's then aligning, right, well, I know that my most valuable customers from my data are hanging out in these places. Right, let's go get more of those. But I think a lot of people make assumptions around who their most valuable customers are and go, oh, well, we target people like this, or these are our customers, and they don't actually look in the data. And actually, the good thing about a lot of the data you've got, you're sat on a gold mine of information to help you build your future targeting. So you might think it's like everybody's got this assumption that it's only 15-year-old girls on TikTok. But actually, when you analyze the data, it's not. It's a completely broad spectrum of demographic and ages, and it's increasing more in the 30s to 40s to 50s. That's the fastest growing section. And then what will happen is the young kids will go find something else because TikTok won't be cool anymore. All right, that's what's going to happen. It's like all the young people left Facebook because Facebook was for old people, which isn't the case still. Everybody's on Facebook, but I think it's understanding your data, analyzing your data, to get the target audience of then where do you then go find that, put your creative message to attract new customers. And I think people don't do it because it's hard, and you need data out. You need some serious data analysts capabilities, understanding the machine learning elements of it, or understanding how we do clustering, and then how do you rerun the cluster and it pulls everybody together. And watching a data scientist do that bit of work is fascinating. But there's loads of open source models now. If you're half interested in learning yourself, or there's plenty of people out there who can help you. But I imagine the good thing now is most people have a huge amount of data on their customers, but they're probably not using it.
That's a great point. Thinking about data, certainly in the EU, it's different than in the States, and probably different in certain other countries as well. But you've got this tension arising between sort of the advertising industry and its desire to get the right ads in front of the right people at the right time, and the government's interests in potentially helping people protect their own privacy. But of course, the byproduct of being more and more private at an individual level, either because you chose it for yourself or because the government chose it for you by putting in place a regulatory infrastructure, is that you're going to see crappier ads the more anonymous you are, right? The
Yeah.
more the platforms know about you, the more delighted you can be with the advertising that you see. And so there's an inherent sort of odd, conundrum there, right? In that either at the individual level or at the regulatory level, if you take the fidelity out of the system, then almost everybody loses, right? The yields go down because the marketers are less willing to pay for untargeted media, right? And so that puts pressure on journalistic enterprises who can't make the money that they would have made had they been able to identify that John Readman lives in this location and is an avid gardener. But now they don't know that anymore. You're just a number somewhere, right, in an ad call. So, any thoughts on that pendulum swinging? And
I think
is it
that's
going to get worse before it gets better? Will it get better because people will realize like they've overcorrected for privacy, either at the regulatory level or at the individual level?
I
Um,
think there's two sides to this. One is I completely agree with this is a really interesting challenge. Uh, if we just look at the advertising data, so like the cookie-based data or the tracking-based data, um, there's one argument to say, well, I'm only going to keep seeing the same stuff all the time, and I'm in this echo chamber of middle-aged man in his 40s who likes cycling, who likes this, and that's all I'm ever going to see. So am I ever going to see anything new? Is an interesting one. So that's something. But then the challenge as an advertiser, which goes back to your point exactly, if I can no longer target the middle-aged man who's interested in cycling, the cost for me to advertise to randomly trip over those people is going to get massively increase. But the success of my marketing, I'm going to waste a lot of eyeballs, a lot of money, and also people's enjoyment of these platforms or their readership of the published articles is probably going to be affected, because sometimes when you go onto different news sites, you see relevant content and relevant ads or even relevant affiliate links. It improves your experience. So I think it will get worse before it gets better. But I think what brands can do is maybe start understanding more about the logged in first party experience. And you're starting to see that a lot more. Once you're logged in, that's you can then do a lot more tracking on what people are doing and where they're going and what they're looking at. But I think what we've got to put faith in, Kevin, with all of this is there's a lot of money in advertising, and either Google or Facebook or someone else will come up with something else to force they're not. It's not going to go away. But I think the challenge is twofold. The consumer experience will get worse as the ability to highly target people. The cost will go up for the advertisers, so I think it will get worse before it gets better. But I'm also mainly, it might be blind faith in the advertising industry. They always come up with a way. I remember probably 10 years ago, certainly in the EU, with well, it was global, the whole GDPR and the whole having to accept cookies. That was going to kill the industry. We weren't going to be able to sell anything online, and nobody would accept cookies. And it was only a very small percentage of people. Most people just go click yes because they want the best user experience possible. There's always going to be a certain number of people who have ad blockers and who have all of that. But I think it will evolve, and it will get worse before it gets better, but also we will come up with interesting and different ways to get around this. And I think the advertising industry is hugely incentivized to do that. So, but I also, this is quite interesting. I often now buy a printed newspaper, right? Because then I'm actually reading random content that was curated by an editor that isn't highly targeted to me. It's just, but then I suppose I buy a certain type of newspaper because of who I am. So it's still sort of targeted, isn't it? But it's yeah, because sometimes I think you can see you only end up in an echo chamber of the content that you like. So if you keep liking the same things on TikTok, you start seeing more of the same things on TikTok. Whereas how are you going to find new and fresh things? So I think it will evolve. It will get harder and more expensive before it gets better. But there's definitely a future in all of this, and targeting is still going to be a thing. We're not, as long as, and the way I go back to the point, I was having this conversation with someone the other day. As long as there's multiple ad platforms, all after the advertising dollar, there will be a competitive tension for them to improve their products and provide the brands with a product that gives them their customers, right? And unless Google, Facebook, TikTok, and Amazon all merge, which they're never going to, there is a place for quality advertising and quality measurement and quality targeting.
Yeah, that's a great point, in that the ecosystem is incentivized to do a good job for the marketer, right? Or they lose their wallet share of the media spend.
And
So
we're already seeing that with have people found extra money to spend on TikTok, or have they taken money from elsewhere to spend on TikTok? Right? Have people taken money that they were spending on Facebook and they're now spending it on digital connected TV, or have they found extra money? It may be a bit of both, but there is an ecosystem that is designed to deliver a quality product for the advertiser.
that's a great point. Thanks so much, John, for sharing your opining on the current and future state of advertising and media, particularly obviously Google being at the foundation of many marketers' campaigns. I look forward to continuing to follow Ask Bosco as it ventures across the pond into the States.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me on, Kevin, and really appreciated our chat and enjoyed that.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.